I'm going to introduce Greg Rodriguez, who is going to be the moderator. It's a look at all of the questions that current and advanced transportation technology may bring to us. Gregory is of Counsel with BB&K in the Washington, D.C. office, has quite an interesting background in both working in a transportation planning agency, working on Capitol Hill. Now he works with clients on all kinds of federal legislation around transportation, but also keeps his hand in very much to sort of new technology and the new advanced transportation options that we're seeing. He's got a podcast, which I'm going to check out tonight at Mobility Podcast. And I actually had a preview of this panel. I had dinner last night with Greg and Tom, and I thought I was kind of a transportation systems geek, right? But these guys, as soon as they got to do a discussion of the relative merits of Google Maps versus Waze, I knew I was over my head. So over to you, Greg. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that introduction. How's everybody doing? Good. Hopefully you all are enjoying the program so far. Having been involved in the planning process on this since, I think it was in the fall in November where we started mapping out this vision. It's very exciting to see it come to fruition. A lot of hard work, but it was all to make sure that you all came here today and appreciate you all being here. And we want this to be hopefully an interactive, lively discussion. I encourage you, I'm going to be monitoring Twitter. I'm going to try and do a bunch of different things at once, and hopefully I don't get tech overloaded. But to try and, if you all have themes, questions you want to put out there, and don't necessarily want to pick up a microphone, feel free to tweet that out using the BB&K Fund the Future hashtag if you're a Twitter person. If not, we'll do the typical question and answer at the end. So I'm very excited for this panel. I'm going to try and set the theme a little bit with some pictures, and then we're going to go right into our panel. But I call this one historical multimodal. We have automobiles, streetcars, horse and buggies, and people. And I think, you could probably put this in any city right now, and while you may not have the horse and buggy there, you have a couple of the, some of the others still remain. And especially as we're starting to talk more about automated vehicles, drones, flying cars, it's trying to figure out how are we gonna think about the future and integrate these technologies in an effective and efficient manner. So this is old school congestion. This is from the streets of LA. It was an old picture I found online. I thought it was fascinating. And again, it shows, I think, a lot of the challenges that we're maybe facing in the future as we continue to think about integrating technology into our communities. So the highway system, one of the reasons I was very inspired to get into working in DC and working on national transportation policy issues is former DOT Secretary Anthony Foxx really promoted this vision around using the future of transportation to connect communities. And he argued, and I think this picture arguably supports that, is that the highway system divided communities, and this is LA and the I-10 being put in. And you can see it is going right through communities right there. And one thing that Secretary Foxx was promoting was how do we use these new technologies to enhance and promote connections. And I think that's a theme we're going to be talking about today is what are the economic opportunities around transportation? How do we get people to jobs? We've already heard the urban and rural conversation, and these are all things that I hope we'll start to get into today and probably get into more with your questions. So managed lanes, I pulled this off of RCTC and some drawings they had about some of the managed lane work that they're doing. I know Ann Mayer is here with us, and we'll be talking a little bit about that. Some of us in the automated vehicle space are thinking, could we have BRT be the first potential solution for automated vehicles, and then potentially platooning them or having them operate very closely to each other, essentially tailgating using connected technology in the future, being able to essentially have trains on highways. And there's a whole separate policy discussion around that, but kind of trying to rethink transportation around these technologies that we're talking about. Automated and connected, is this what we might look like in the future where we have a dedicated lane for automated vehicles. I'm not promoting that. I'm not saying that's a good idea. There's equity issues. Is it fair for us to create a lane only for an automated car versus other people, and they may be sitting in congestion in their normal vehicles? But it's something that we need to be thinking about. And the little green things on top of the cars, promote connectivity. Are we going to have both automated and connected vehicles in the future? And when we talk about infrastructure, are we thinking about the smart infrastructure that might be needed to support connected vehicles in the future? And I think Thomas and I will probably get a little debate about, or discussion around, how do we use the right-of-way effectively, and what are the opportunities to make sure local communities still have the opportunity to recoup revenue with regards to the use of the public right-of-way. And finally, is it forget the roads? Are we just going to be flying around? And this is a picture of a passenger drone, and they're being tested right now, including in the state of Nevada. And that, I think, leads to a whole different policy and safety discussion. And I'm sure a lot of those of you from cities, your law enforcement providers are probably looking at you and being like, whoa, when's that coming? So this is, trying to set the stage for hopefully a collaborative discussion here, and trying, we're not going to have all the answers, but trying to get you all thinking about things that you can hopefully be planning for. And one of the things we really try and do in our DC office, and when you all come out to DC, is how do we make sure you all are being proactive? Because you have the opportunity to have a voice in DC and not always have to be reactive. And so that's, hopefully we'll get to a lot of those themes today. And again, appreciate you all being here. So with that, I'm going to start with Ann Mayer. She's the Executive Director of Riverside County Transportation Commission. I will let Ann talk about the great work that she's doing, but I know that she leads a great staff. I had the privilege to work with them in DC on some funding projects, and she leads a very dedicated team that really does care about how do we make sure people are moving, how do we address some of these growing issues around congestion. And so Ann leads a staff of 50 with an annual budget of $782 million. And so in addition to running a great staff, she also has to help manage a budget. And I think we heard that in the first panel, the accountability that citizens expect with regard to public funding is a big issue. And I know Ann is doing that well, and look forward to her talking a little bit about what she's doing right now. So thank you for being here.
Great, thank you very much. I really appreciate the invitation to join you all here today. I am very happy to say that RCTC is still completely multimodal. We just built a detour for the horse trail adjacent to our I-15 project through the city of Norco, Horsetown, USA. I think this is their Horsetown Rodeo Week. So I have to tell you, mobility by horse is still a popular mode of travel in some parts of Riverside County. So very excited about that. It's interesting hearing some of the discussion earlier this morning, kind of looking at some of these historical photos. As much as things change, they also stay the same. And it's really tricky trying to find that balance between acknowledging that we have to be dealing with current day real world problems, such as pavement on the road, versus what is it going to look like in the future? What does mobility look like in the future? I'm really proud of the work that RCTC has done. Just a little bit of background on RCTC. We are the county's regional transportation planning agency. We have a governing body of 34 board members. One is ex officio, but an elected official from each city within the county, as well as all 5 county supervisors. So it really is a terrific venue to discuss regional issues and talk about regional solutions, as opposed to everyone focusing on their own individual requirements. In terms of long-range planning, the regional focus really started getting underway almost a couple decades ago now with the Riverside County Integrated Project, where there was a concentrated effort to look at land use decisions, transportation improvements, and preservation and protection of our environment. That created the foundation for most of the decisions that have been made over the past 20 years. And even with that foundation, even with that forward-looking vision, it still has been a bit of a challenge, because hearing this morning about the challenges so many of our municipalities are having just reaching their goals related to essential services, it's becoming more and more difficult to implement those visionary strategies that people so desire and are so focused on trying to produce when there are so many challenges on a day-to-day basis. In Riverside County, over the past decade or so, we've really been focusing on getting our basic infrastructure in place. I'm really proud of the work that's been done in our toll program. I'm joined today by Michael Bloomquist, the RCTC toll program manager. So for well over a decade now, we've been implementing the project that is the RCTC juggernaut, and that is the 91 express lanes. It was really important to us to look at the future and how we make sure that people can move. Express lanes and an express lane network in Southern California is really going to hold a key to our ability to meet our mobility needs of the future. Not only do we need to focus on congestion management strategies, demand management strategies, we need to have the infrastructure in place so that we can focus on moving more people through the same physical space as opposed to people just being single driver in their car on a daily basis. A toll network really provides us with some terrific opportunities. The 91 express lanes opened a year ago, so we have a year under our belt. We immediately rolled from the 91 project straight into our Interstate 15 tolled express lane project, and we really think that will make a big difference in the future. But at the same time, how do we address the upcoming changes in technology? What do we do with electric vehicles? What do we do when the entire fleet is all electric vehicles? We have cleaner air, we're still going to have congestion. So how do we deal with that in terms of implementation? How do we deal with autonomous vehicles? And so there's a lot of really exciting opportunities that we see we can focus on not only in Riverside County, but throughout the Southern California region. Also want to point out another project that's very important to us, the Paris Valley line. It's a 24-mile extension of Metrolink. So it was the first extension of Metrolink Southern California regional rail system since its inception in the early 90s. So we implemented that project as well, so people have choices. Choice is important, whether it's driving in a golf cart on Tom Kirk's CV link out in the desert, or using their feet to walk, whether it's using the Santa Ana River Trail, a bus, a sidewalk, a train, autonomous vehicle in an express lane. Those are mobility choices, and it's our responsibility to provide those. So I'm excited for the conversation today and appreciate being here.
That's great. Well, thank you. That was a great opening, and you hit three of the themes I was hoping to hit on this panel. How do we plan for it? How do we pay for it? And how do we integrate it with our existing transportation system? So it's obviously something that's on your mind, and that was a great introduction. So when you talked about electric vehicles and a potential electric infrastructure we're going to need for the future, that's where we're excited to have Dr. Austin Brown here with us today. He's the Executive Director of the Policy Institute for Energy, Environment, and the Economy at University of California, Davis. I met Austin in Washington, D.C. Through a mutual friend from law school, and it's been great to keep in touch with him. We've been working on policy briefs and recently spoke at a working group that was put on by AARP. Again, going back to this, how do we maximize the opportunities around technology? A potential demographic that could obviously use technologies to not only get to healthcare, but also potentially have healthcare brought to them, thinking about medicines, things like that. So I know Austin and I really enjoyed that conversation, excited to have him here today, and look forward to hearing what he's working on right now. So thank you, Austin.
Great, yeah, thanks Greg, and thanks for having me. I'm really glad I'm mic'd up today. You may be able to tell I lost my voice over the weekend, so I was in Oakland for the no-hitter against the Red Sox, and I'm a big A's fan. So I challenge any baseball fan to go see a no-hitter and not cheer yourself hoarse. So I'm recovering, I'm fine, I sound worse than I feel. But I will, maybe this will actually be motivation for me to be briefer than usual. Usually getting me to shut up is the hard part. Maybe now I'll actually find an excuse not to talk too much. But I do want to talk a little bit about the way we see some of these infrastructure challenges as part of the broader future of transportation. And at Davis, we've taken to calling the kind of nexus of these transformative technologies, for shorthand, we call it the three revolutions. And by three revolutions, we mean moving towards transportation systems that are shared, electric, and automated. And each of these things is happening in some different areas and in some different ways. And what we see the three revolutions as is just the nexus when all of those actually come together and you get to a transportation system that takes the biggest advantages of all of those together. So to give you sort of an example of what I would mean from that, that could mean instead of when I landed in LAX last night, instead of renting a car and coming out here because it would have been prohibitively expensive to take a Lyft or an Uber, I could have just jumped in a shared a microbus that was headed out towards Fullerton, maybe with a bunch of other students, or if I really wanted to get some work done, I could pay a little extra and be in an automated vehicle driving just me there, both of them potentially being charged on electricity so they're not polluting the local area, and then potentially taking a lane, if I'm willing to do that shared trip, taking a lane that might be reserved for shared vehicles. Instead, what I did was jump in the car and experience traffic. What we love to say about traffic is if you're in traffic, you're not in traffic, you are traffic. So of course I was making all of your problems a little bit worse by my presence, which helps no one. So we see this three revolutions as potentially having the ability to solve pretty much all of our problems in transportation. We've talked about, I think, all of them today. Environmental damage, both local and global. Congestion, obviously, environmental justice and equity, so the ability of people who don't have access to transportation systems to experience that, the economic benefits of transportation, and of course our infrastructure challenges. It has the potential to address all of those if you bring this confluence together and get that right. Of course, on the other hand, wherever you have transformations of this magnitude that get that deep into aspects of our society, there's enormous potential for unintended consequences. We heard Professor Walks talked about the land use implications of high-speed rail. That's a big one. Think about what the land use implications are if I own a mobile living room and can, on my way to work, which is 150 miles away, take care of all of my email, brush my teeth, have a sandwich, watch a movie, and take a nap, all while just trundling along on a freeway with nice tinted windows, not even showing me the actual congestion around me. What kind of a system will we build then? There's a huge potential for that to influence things in negative directions as well in all of those metrics, right? That kind of a world could create additional pollution. It could worsen our access to transportation services. It could worsen congestion. So we really feel like we're at this potential crossroads where we see the future of these changes and enormous potential, but also huge potential unintended consequences. And we forget sometimes in the face of shifts this big that we as humans and as a society get some say in how this evolves. We don't just sit there and watch it happen. And in large part, what's going to shape these futures is the infrastructure that we develop and how we integrate these vehicles into that infrastructure. So in that spirit, I thought I would make some bold predictions, because I think that's what we're all supposed to do here today, about what some of these infrastructure challenges and choices that we're going to have. And I'll caveat this by saying anybody who tells you they know exactly what this future is going to look like, where automation and shared mobility and electrification are all coming in at the same time, anybody who tells you they know exactly what that future is going to look like, they are making things up. Nobody does. That's what's so fun about this. I first started working on this topic maybe intensely about 5 years ago in DC. And I remember the first time somebody referred to me as an expert in automated vehicles. And I looked at them and went, no, there are no experts in this. That's what makes it so fun. And I still think that's honestly true. I mean, when you compare the level of understanding we have of this with some of the experts in this room who have been working on transportation infrastructure or water infrastructure or pensions for decades, those of us who've been studying this longest are still children, we're still amateurs, and that's why I love it so much. So that's the caveat. Nobody knows what this is going to look like, and that's what makes it so fun. With that said, let's maybe make some bold predictions. So one I think that maybe is the softest, the easiest, the one we are the most certain of, is that we're going to have a greater need for infrastructure maintenance going forward. So we know automated vehicles, with the sensors they have equipped, they do really well when they understand the world that they're in, when it's well mapped and they understand every piece of infrastructure. They know where the stripes are going to be. They know where the signs are going to be. As soon as that infrastructure starts to deteriorate, they don't understand the world around them as well. So you really want to focus on having a well-maintained infrastructure to support these sorts of vehicles. And California is already saying, well, we're just going to paint the stripes a little bit wider to make that computer vision task a little easier, right? Little things that help a lot. On the flip side, it might actually get easier to know where those maintenance challenges exist. So if an automated vehicle with all of its sensors is going down a street and it notices, oh, that sign that was there yesterday isn't there anymore, or it bumps and hits a deep pothole, it can actually phone home and do the equivalent of whatever an automated vehicle calling 311 is, and say, hey, you actually have an infrastructure challenge that you didn't know you had. And that reporting could really actually make our jobs maintaining the infrastructure system a lot easier. Another effect, and maybe another one that's I think fairly likely, maybe even bordering on certain in some markets, is that we're going to see dramatic impacts on both parking infrastructure and parking revenues. I haven't heard parking come up here too much, but it's starting to get more and more discussion around the transportation community, especially because many cities rely on parking revenue as a very important piece of their overall funding structure. We're already seeing in some Bay Area cities that because people realize it's cheaper to take a TNC downtown, a transportation network company like Lyft or Uber downtown, rather than pay to park, parking revenue has dropped off fairly precipitously in some neighborhoods. We expect that only to continue. The upside of that one, though, is you have this enormous amount of resource that's very underutilized in a lot of places, parking lots, parking structures, that could be converted and upscaled and used for different purposes. Similar to that, we expect the curb, access to different spots on the curb, to have new value that it didn't have before. Right now, maybe we have it as a parking space that's occupied in many cities for free for most of the day. If you can say, what do we actually need this curb for? Do we need this for pickup and drop off for certain services? Can we use that to prioritize pooled services that are picking up multiple people? Can we use that to prioritize electric vehicles if we want to incentivize that? So the access to the curb is going to give cities dramatic new tools to be able to shape how this future occurs. The more ambitious version of that is actually thinking more generally about access to streets and access to regions of a city, and saying maybe we want to try to use that to incentivize the sorts of transportation options we want. Maybe we actually price access to a so-called go zone or a congestion zone or a decongestion zone, and prioritize that access for high occupant vehicles, for electric vehicles, maybe for vehicles driven or operated by people who can't afford to pay, can receive a subsidy. These are all options that are now being discussed. They have major policy challenges that I'm happy to go into in our discussion. And then the last kind of infrastructure question I'll bring up is on electric vehicle charging. This came up a moment ago. We know that we need new infrastructure for electric vehicles. A lot of that we thought, we're actually going to do most of our charging at home and at the workplace. And the data so far bears that out. The vast majority of charging by the electric vehicles already on our roads is happening at home and at the workplace. Well, if these vehicles are in fleets that are picking up people and driving them around all day, that completely flips that on its head. And we've seen with some early pilots, drivers of these vehicles use public infrastructure many times more frequently than owners of a personal vehicle that are just using it for themselves. In between trips, somebody who's driving for Lyft or Uber with an electric vehicle wants to stop and top up their charge while they wait for the next fare. So this means very different things for what our public EV infrastructure is going to have to look like. So that's just a few of these kind of infrastructure questions. I'd love to get more into any of those, any of the other topics that people want to talk about. In summation, I mean, we just have this enormous set of challenges coming straight at us, and it does feel like we could just sort of wait and see how it evolves. Maybe we think, infrastructure takes such a long time to change, it takes such a long time to get there, we can just wait and see what these technologies look like. But we have to remember, infrastructure is ever evolving, and it is going to be one of the deciding factors for how these technologies evolve. So I don't think we can sit on our thumbs and wait and see what happens. I think we actually need to be proactive about getting that policy framework in place to steer that future towards those benefits, towards those things that empower people, enable cities to reach their transportation goals, and away from some of the more significant unintended consequences that we see lurking out there. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Austin. That was a lot of very great comments about things that we're working on in DC and thinking about at a national level. So I'm excited to have Thomas Bamonte here. Thomas is the Senior Program Manager for Automated Vehicles at the North Central Texas Council of Governments. I'm excited for him here for a couple reasons. Another theme we heard this morning is that theme around regional collaboration. So I know we got to get Thomas and those of us who went to dinner got to get into a little bit last night and talking about the opportunities and challenges there. And I think one thing that Austin just talked about that I think is important too is, this isn't a one-size-fits-all approach at this very early stage, and that's another thing I think that's come up this morning is we have a very diverse country and we have very diverse communities, and right now we don't even know what a safe automated vehicle looks like. And so taking that all into context and taking that all back to your communities to figure out how do we want this technology to work to hopefully enhance options, I really like to use the word options, transportation options in our communities, is something that is going to be a struggle, and it's not going to be easy, but hopefully we can all get there together. So with that, I'll let Thomas talk about what he's doing in Texas. And also, Thomas is a great tweeter. I get a lot of really great information from him. He tweets out everything on automated vehicles, so we'll make sure his Twitter handle is included in the materials you all get. He keeps me up to date on all my reports, so I have to give him credit for that.
Great, thank you. Thanks for those kind words. It's great to be here. And greetings from Texas. I know that our governor and the performance of his official duties can be somewhat unkind about California, but trust me, Texans across the political persuasions, we look to California for ideas, innovation, and leadership, and we really feel some fellow feeling to some of your great work and your great challenges. We're building an incredible urban region in the Texas Triangle. It will soon eclipse the Chicago area as one of the biggest urban regions in the country. And we look to build on what you've done in California and hopefully do it a little better. So again, put the rhetoric where it belongs and understand that we really are inspired by California. Austin lives in my world on a daily basis. I work for the MPO for the Dallas-Fort Worth region. We're working with automated vehicle developers and on policy. I have a very engaged, very tech-friendly policy board that is pushing for transportation innovation. DFW is the home of Uber Elevate, so those aerial drones is being developed there with Bell Helicopter. We invented the toll transponder. We have a big managed lane system. We came together as a region to build DFW Airport, a lot of traditional regional cooperation. But I'm not going to talk about that work, bringing the revolution. I wanted to spend a little time on the planning process. And I report as someone who's a recovering lawyer, not an engineer, not a planner, but I offer a perspective from those backgrounds. So the theme here is the bill is due, which kind of reminds me of you've had a great party and it's time to deal with the hangover. And you think of the 20th century, it was a great party for big infrastructure. Automobiles in the highway, planes, the airline system, containers, the revamping of ports, electric system, this huge water infrastructure, those awe-inspiring dams and aqueducts, the internet. All of that was done, great party. But I feel like we're in the hangover stage a bit. We have some new transportation innovations, transportation things that are coming. They're going to disrupt us. They're going to change our infrastructure. Austin covered those very well. But they're not quite close enough, the Hyperloop, the automated vehicle, et cetera, for regions to really bet big on new infrastructure. And what that means is our planning process, my sense is still really rooted in this transportation silo. It is very much about kind of building on the past and replicating the present into the future. And the fact is, however, again, we're in this hangover period, the big transportation infrastructure is not delivering the returns that we once associated with big transportation infrastructure. You build an interstate between two urban regions, you got a lot of bang for your buck. You add another lane to an already congested freeway, the bang is much, much less. But what's happening in the planning process is the transportation planners, they're used to using increases in capacity to deliver solutions. That's how we've done things. We build our way out of congestion. And we find ourselves in a situation where our planners are saying, we're going to throw a lot of money in our region toward transportation, and it's going to get worse. And that's a really hard thing to ask the public to make huge investments in their future when you're promising things are going to get worse. I'll give you an example from our region. We have our 2045 plan out for comment. We're going to spend, let's say, $55 billion to increase highway capacity, another $35 to increase transit capacity, and the customer experience is going to be significantly worse. more delay, more congestion, less reliability. So think of that. You're selling, your long-term business plan as a business person is you're going to sell an inferior product in the future. I mean, does that make sense? But the institutional forms and the deference to expertise is so pervasive that plans like ours and like probably most MPOs throughout the country are going to sail through the policy boards, and they're going to get a stamp of approval saying, we're going to invest a lot of money and it's going to get worse. And I got to say that I think it would be refreshing to have elected officials on those policy boards say to their planners, you know what, we get it. You've done great work in your silo, but I'm not willing as a public official to sign off on a plan that says the future is going to be worse for my constituents. Go back to your drawing board, forget the silo, come up with some proposals for how you can more effectively use public money to deliver solutions. And if that requires legal and institutional changes, let us as politicians handle that. But give us some ideas. I really think that the professional planners would welcome their oversight board giving that kind of direction, as opposed to, this is how we've always planned for 50 years, this is how we've always approached transportation planning for 50 years, and this is how it's going to be for the next 25 years. And maybe there'll be some revolutions coming, but the drumbeat of the revolution is just a little too far away for us to really change the way we do things. So if you're an elected official, if you have a chance to have some influence in those planning bodies, ask them, challenge them to go back with fresh solutions. So kind of my suggestions as we're in this interim phase between a century of innovation and perhaps another century of innovation is, rather than make no small plans for the immediate future, make no big plans. Maybe what we need to do for a while is focus on maintenance, encourage pilots, innovation, let's see how things work, and not try to use infrastructure to solve automation or use infrastructure to solve shared mobility, but experiment and maybe approach things a little differently. Rather than focus as we have in, let's use transportation to connect people to distant places, maybe some of those resources could be spent on building places where people can do their major life activities with less consumption of transportation. Maybe in the water side, maybe the engineers get so excited about conservation that it's more exciting to conserve than build. Again, for a time, until the infrastructure is called back into some decisive action. So I would just end with, even though, again, in my day job, I'm pushing automation, talking to developers, pushing the future, putting on a planner hat, maybe we have a half decade or a decade to be in a position of what do we want our communities to be? What do we want to ask of the next generations of technology to support that improved vision of community? So to paraphrase JFK, ask not what we do for technology, ask what technology can do for our communities, and use this time, this precious time between one party or the hangover to the next party, use the time to think about how we want our communities to be and pursue that vision with the new technologies. So with that, Greg, turn it back over to you.
Great, thank you. Those were also great comments. So you all are making my job very easy. I appreciate that. I do want to pick up on the theme that Thomas just talked about with regard to the theme of a return on investment. And again, I think that's a theme that we heard early on, and I want to ask the first question to Anne, because she knows this very well, I think, with regard to the public outreach you're doing on your new projects. And something that we talked about as we planned for this panel was, how do we better communicate the value of transportation? I think, this is a theme that since being at BB&K, I picked up on with regard to water. It takes a lot of money for us to get the clean water that we enjoy that comes out of our faucets. And I think we take that for granted. With Lyft and Uber, I think we now take for granted the value of transportation. All we see is that $12 ride on Lyft and Uber. We're not thinking about everything that went into the road maintenance, the traffic signals, the potential traffic signal infrastructure that's all interconnected. So with that kind of theme on return on investment and the value of transportation, and with your work on managed lanes, I wonder if you would like to share any thoughts on that.
Sure, and there's no doubt that transportation and mobility has value. It has value to all of our daily lives. And the challenge is, how do we communicate that value effectively? Thomas talked a little bit about planners and engineers. We engineers aren't often the most communicative group in terms of trying to convey just how important some of the transportation initiatives are. We had some real learning experiences over the past couple of years. When our 91 Express Lanes project was under construction, when we started construction, there was no Instagram, or if there was, it was in its infancy. There was no Waze. There were not technologies deployed from the communication standpoint when we started construction, but they all emerged during construction, and it changed the expectations of the people we were trying to talk to. It caused us to try and catch up really quickly, and so you start learning from those kinds of initiation by fire experiences just what matters most to people. And what people want to hear is just the straight facts they want information about what their trip is going to be, how much it's going to cost. They want someone else to take care of it. We really learned from some focus groups we did last summer. We were really surprised at just how many words we were using in communicating with people, thinking we were sharing information, and none of those words resonated with the people in our focus group. Really, all they wanted to be able to do is get up in the morning, know how long their trip was going to be to work or to school, and know what time they were going to come home. They wanted someone else to take care of concern about the infrastructure that was there or the mode that they were using. They wanted people to be accountable for the decisions they made, but really people just want to be able to have a good quality of life and get where they're going. So I think for us, in terms of communicating that value, we need to really roll it back to the basics. What information do people want, and what language do we use in trying to share that information with them? And that's really the basics, because when we start talking about some of these broader, longer-term issues, and we start talking about the future, people care right now. People care about the future, of course they do, but people care right now about what's going to happen in their daily life. I am not getting bonus points when I say we are not going to build our way out of this. That does not resonate with my elected officials. It does not resonate with their constituents. People want projects. People want more. It's not a solution anymore. If we're widening a freeway and we're only going from level of service F to a level of service F, and people are still stuck in traffic, it's not the biggest bang for the buck. So we have to try and figure out what are our options, and how do we communicate that with people, and how do we listen to what we're being told so we provide people the services that they need. It's a real challenge, but I think we need to get back to some basics in terms of communication and understanding just what people are expecting.
That's great. Do any of you want to jump in on that? I'm sure you might have some thoughts.
I think we transportation providers are a bit complacent. Think of all the things that in your daily life has transformed in the last 50 years. From rotary phone to your smartphone is just one example. But frankly, you have to work when you drive. Your drive probably takes just about as long as your grandparents' drive. There's nothing fundamental different or special about the product we're selling, and I think there's a lot of consumer fatigue where this is just a product that's no one really gets excited about. And so I do think some of the revolutions that Austin talks about may give us a chance to satisfy some of the demand for kind of everyday improvement in your life as you travel that Ann gets from her constituents. I'm a little resistant to the notion that just kind of celebrating the present is the way we're going to go. We're going to have to somehow invite these new technologies and roll them out in a way to get folks who are excited about mobility and willing to, frankly, pony up either through tolls or taxes to pay for whatever infrastructure is needed.
Yeah, I guess I'd just add that I think one common thread there is both in congestion and then also in issues around parking. One of the big challenges we face and why people sort of take the system for granted is we've gotten accustomed to thinking of those things as free. Access to roads, and in most cases, in most cities, access to parking, when in fact those things are not free, right? And if you sort of really pin someone down on it, they'll kind of acknowledge, oh yeah, I guess somebody had to build it, and I guess I'm adding, cost to everybody else in congestion when I'm driving, and I guess if I'm shopping at a store and not paying for parking, I guess I'm paying for it in the goods I've got. So they kind of know when you really challenge people on it that yes, in fact, these things are not free, but we're very accustomed to thinking of them as free. Access to the road is free, access to a parking lot is free, or at least included in the price of the goods. And this is something I think we really want to think about, because if we let the new mobility services get into that same space where I'm in an automated vehicle and access to everything is free, we're just going to compound that problem. And once you come back and say, oh, actually it wasn't free all along and now you need to pay for it, like, we know people do not like to have to pay for things that they once considered free. In DC, they added a 5-cent bag tax, plastic bag tax, because of the level of garbage in the Anacostia River. And the public vitriol was astonishing. People said, I live in DC, but I'm going to drive to Maryland to do my grocery shopping to avoid a 5-cent plastic bag tax, or heaven forbid, carrying a bag with you. People just don't like it. It seems to be something about human nature. But we have to think about that now, because if you get into that mindset where these vehicles have free access to stuff running automated, you can really compound some of these problems, right? So one simple example is, let's say I go downtown for dinner, and my vehicle drops me off. Why shouldn't it just circle the block waiting for me? Or pull over in a little lane, and then if it gets stopped by a traffic police officer, then it just kind of scampers off and finds the next curb to hide in. There's no rules against this right now. And if access to that road and that curb remains free for these new no mobility modes, it's the same problem that we have with that access now, plus all these unintended consequences of a car that never gets exhausted and doesn't mind circling the block for as long as you care to be in there, having dessert. And all the accompanying challenges with that.
And I think you're seeing, like Chicago and others who are taxing TNCs as a revenue source. You mentioned also curb space as revenue generators. It's easier to charge a service provider than charge you and I. Yeah. So I do think there's opportunities there at either local or state level to identify some revenue opportunities.
Yeah, and the providers sort of rightly point out, well, this isn't fair. Why are you pricing us and not pricing people who drive their own cars? And then there are also some missed opportunities there where they're not pricing trips that are shared trips to be less expensive. So what you really want to do is get the incentives to align with the outcomes, right? So you'd want to have it be cheaper to share a trip into a congested zone, and none of the municipalities that have done this so far have set that up. New York talked about doing it, talked about a more general congestion charge, and then Robin Chase, the founder of Zipcar, said they just punted, right? I think that's the exact right analogy. They said, we're going to price TNCs, but we're not going to really set it up to incentivize the kind of behavior we want, or price these other trips that they have real congestion impacts too, right? So cities are seeing the TNC impacts and able to price that because it's a new service.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. Please.
In terms of pricing, it's a really tough conversation, and I applaud the elected officials in Southern California who, for the most part, are trying really hard to start embedding the concept of user fee into the policy decisions they're making. The RCTC board made the decision to implement tolling in 2006. That's a really tough call. We're implemented now. It's still a tough call. People expect it to be free. So when we start implementing these layers of user fees, which is the right thing to do, because if you use it, you should pay for it. Nothing is for free. But as we start layering this, the challenge that many elected officials making these really tough policy calls will be faced with is, what do they do about the fatigue? that their constituents are feeling. We heard this morning about the sales tax measures occurring for transportation at a regional level. Some counties have multiple sales tax measures. We've considered whether we need another sales tax measure. Cities have a sales tax measures, and we have user fees on top of it. So we have to figure out collectively how we can layer these user fees in so that the burden is not so great that everything collapses. And that sounds very negative, and I didn't mean it to sound negative and dark, but it's the reality of the situation we're in. We need to be really strategic about implementation, really make sure that we communicate, again, the value of doing this. If people go downtown, they want to be able to have a parking space, because if you can't have a parking space, if they're driving, first off, let's try and get them not to drive downtown. But if they're going downtown and in a car, they want a parking space. Let's convey the value of that parking space. I think it's a really important conversation with respect to user fees, incentivizing behavior. The 91 express lanes, one of the things we're most proud of is we now have express bus service running in both directions on the 91 corridor from the city of San Bernardino all the way down into Disneyland and into Orange County. $3 trip on an express bus, nice express bus. The buses are full. Could they be fuller? Absolutely. So the question is, we put innovative concepts in place, we make them affordable, they're user fee based. How do we encourage people to get on board? And I think this is really a driving question for what do we do over the next 10 years to start encouraging people to use alternative modes and embrace technology and innovation.
That's great. So I want to pick up on one theme, and then I want to turn it over to the audience. But this conversation around needing to meet basic institutional issues that are going on in local governments is something that resonated with me in a recent conversation with the mayor from St. Louis Park, Minnesota. When I asked him, are you planning for automated vehicles? He's like, yeah, I would love to be, but I need to make sure the trash is taken out every day and that the roads are plowed during the winter, or else I'm not getting elected. And I think that mentality is a challenge because we have these present day operational issues. But I'm curious, maybe I'll start with Thomas, since you're rather new to your organization. How do we help local governments think innovatively? I don't know if it's innovating government, but some of the things you're talking about, to think outside the box and think creatively, I think a lot of agencies want to be doing, but you do have these everyday needs and putting out fires with regard to citizens on roads today. So how?
Well, this is one thing we do in DFW. We encourage friendly competition among communities, and we will provide seed money for innovation where appropriate. But we have, one community is a leader in making traffic signal data accessible to the developer community, one of the first in the country. So we make sure as a regional agency provide some resources, some publicity, help network them, provide the forum where they can interact with their other communities and get them interested, like, oh, you mean you're supporting connected vehicles and it really doesn't cost you very much? And have those productive conversations. We're also doing encouraging local communities to get in the Ways Connected Citizens program, free data share agreements. So again, they see success stories, we build on those success stories, and we provide small seed grants. We try to introduce the developer community to a variety of local communities. So AV developers come and say, we're interested in DFW, I'll shop them around to a variety of communities in all socioeconomic flavors, trying to see if we can find the right kind of match. So, but I think, again, a healthy competition with a policy board that encourages innovation and kind of talk to staff is really essential, and fortunately in DFW we have that.
Just a quick follow-up on the politics of that. It sounds fascinating. Do you get buy-in from the communities early on to support that seed funding and understand they're in kind of, for lack of better words, competition with each other?
I think the competition really comes at the staff level. So we have a technical advisory committee, and these are the folks who every day are responsible for traffic signals and potholes and whatnot. And we use them where we acknowledge leadership and innovation of one or more of those members, and there's peers talking to peers, so there's encouragement there. And then we have some very motivated mayors who say, I want my town, my Frisco, my Plano, my Arlington to be at the forefront, and it's important to me, and they're out in the hustings making that point to constituents and to their staff. Arlington's a great example. It was the largest city without a public transit system. Well, now it's hosted the first automated vehicle deployment in Texas. It's rolled out microtransit service VIA seems to be very successful in that. It's doing it's a global leader in the Waze data sharing. It's trying to go from worst to first. So we're providing, again, everything from cheerleading to some financial support to have them be kind of the regional leader that pulls some of their peers along.
Yeah, sure.
In addition to creating incentive opportunities, I think one of the things we've really seen help is creating consensus and momentum around something that's a core community value. And I'll use an example. In Riverside, we have a significant housing job imbalance. So many of our residents get on the freeway and they drive every day to San Diego, Orange County, and Los Angeles for jobs. So there's been a real consensus regarding the need to bring more jobs to Riverside County. We have some great learning institutions in Riverside County. UCR is just one of them. But several years ago, there was consensus around we needed the medical school at UCR. People from all different areas of the county pulled together to focus on bringing the medical school to Riverside County. We have a great research facility related to engineering and the environment there, the CSERT Center there. They do a lot of air quality research, so bringing in more air quality research. California Air Resources Board is going to move their testing facilities to Riverside. Again, community involvement, all walks of life, all professions, local and regional government pulling together to help encourage CARB to come to Riverside. We're starting to see momentum building. We've got great public health institutes there, education environment, air quality research, research at CSERT related to autonomous vehicles, the environment, public health. We're starting to see this momentum building, and what brought everyone together to build that for the benefit of all was job creation and quality of life for the folks in the region. So I think that's another opportunity there too. Find something that's really a core value for the community and try and build off of that, break out of the silos. Stop talking to those only in our area of expertise and branch out. So we really saw that make a big impact.
And Austin's too modest to mention it, but the real importance of research institutions, universities. They're a very active player in our region, UTA and UTD especially, and having them on board and sharing those kind of values can be very important to do that. So
that's great. So people have questions, go ahead and raise your hand, we'll get a mic to you, but I want to let Austin chime in because you are at UC Davis. What are the opportunities for communities to potentially reach out and say, hey, we want to do a project with you all?
Sure, yeah, I mean, I think having a research partner is incredibly important, and I'll give one sort of illustrative kind of example. So there's been at least 100 pilots of some form going on where the city's trying to figure out these new mobility solutions. So a lot of them are like a transit agency working on microtransit, and these will be designated a pilot. Their board will be really excited about it. They'll go do it. And then honestly, a lot of them so far have just been what you might call a failure. And so the impulse then is to just sweep it under the rug and pretend it never happened and go on. And then when somebody gets excited, you do another pilot and then have the same thing happen again. The point of a pilot isn't to run a successful program, right? I mean, when you actually think about what the point is to learn how to run your next program. And the only way that you can actually do that is to build in research and evaluation components and not be afraid to look under the rock at what the metrics might be. And so building in at the beginning, before, during, and after evaluation of these kinds of projects, I know it's tough. I know nobody wants to have a project that's talked about and studied and doesn't have great metrics, where you have empty microtransit buses that aren't doing well, but then the next community over is just going to run the same microtransit pilot and make the same mistakes all over again. So I think having partner universities nearby is a great way to do this. There's plenty of other methods to build that evaluation and research in, to say, okay, it worked in these ways, it didn't work in these ways, and this is how we're actually going to do it better when we go from pilot to scale. Because you can't just keep running pilots over and over. You have to eventually figure out what's going to scale and become more and more relevant to the communities. So that's my general research plug. I'll withhold from doing UC Davis plug specifically, but of course my colleagues are awesome at that and other avenues of research.
Yeah, and you have various conferences that people can check out, and if you're more interested in the subject matter. So let's open this up to audience questions. Looks like we have one right here.
Carrie Ferguson, San Juan Capistrano. I was really interested in what Thomas had to say about taking a breath, doing some pilot programs, doing some smaller things that will make big differences. And I'm seeing that in South County because there's a drive by at least one of our agencies to have another big infrastructure, another big road. And we're finding maybe there isn't the need for it. But what I do find interesting, and the other thing is that we're experiencing in the whole region that we're not getting the riders on our public transportation. So there are two things that I think would really help, and I'm interested to know if you're having this experience too. When I ride the train from San Juan to downtown, I get off the train and I get on the Metrolink, and it takes me right to where I'm going. That's a successful infrastructure project, and that's the reason I will take the train instead of getting in my car. It got me out of the car. So that's one thing, is having the larger transportation system that connects with a smaller, more individualized thing. Second thing is the idea of decentralization. In South County, the other thing that we've done over time, and we've been working on it for 25 years, but we now have a trolley system of the quaint-looking trolleys. We're by the sea, and people really are interested in getting onto a trolley because it's cute and it's fun and it has wood slat seats and all those good things. What is very interesting about that is that individual cities have their own trolley system. So each city has the power within any period of time to adjust their schedules, adjust where they start and stop. They can really tailor it to the needs of the people. And so we have really good ridership. Our ridership last year, just on our trolley, it was only our second year of using it, was 3 times what the base necessity for continuing is. And it's because we were able to tailor it to the needs. And so I wonder if this is something that's being looked at on a wider level, where you have programs that are decentralized so that you can really have more local control and more success.
Well, thank you for your comments. A couple things. I often think of the metaphor, we spent 50 years focused on traffic arteries. Maybe we need to spend the next decade on traffic capillaries, which is the small scale things like you're describing, and to build a truly healthy system. So, I applaud those efforts of being local, decentralized, and building community while we prepare for some of the next big things that may be coming.
It's great. Any other questions? Sure.
Yes, and I'd agree from Montclair locally that the local entities seem to be doing a lot in relation to grade separations, widenings of freeways, et cetera. I do take a little exception to the comment when you said that the public thinks that the freeways and the roads are free. I'm obviously up in age, and I remember paying my gas taxes all those years for the roads. Now, basically what's happened, the gas tax has been raised, so we can pay for it again on that, and it's how many multiple times do we have to keep paying for it? I live locally here. You look at the 57 freeway out here, it's been under construction for 10 years. basically in those 10 years, we got a lot of freeway walls, and the pavement on it still sucks on that. And possibly will still suck for the next 10 years until the state, Caltrans, and somebody gets their act together for the public and says, okay, we're going to actually fix the roads, the actual main freeway arteries on this, rather than we're going to get more money, squander it on something else at the state, and then come back and want more money. And now we're even getting the idea, well, fine, we can pay for the, quote, Lexus lanes that people could afford to go use those new lanes that we're now paying for again. So those are the kind of public perceptions you guys are running into. I understand the grand idea of trying to get more toward rail, get out of that. And in Montclair, we've got a trans center, we've got a TOD district. We're trying to get the GO line to Montclair so we can take people from Riverside and other ways to other areas and get more transit going that way. And all we're meeting from the local transportation authority is resistance to build more freeway lanes, quote unquote. What's your feelings on that?
And just one qualifying comment. So the gas tax has been raised in California, but not nationally. So there's something, just a preview to our legislative panel. I think we'll talk about that on a national revenue issue. So just want to clarify that. But yeah, please.
We're at a really pivotal point in California here with respect to transportation funding. The gas tax hasn't been raised since 1994. Self-help counties have self-helped all we can. There isn't enough money to go around. There's terrific local programs. The local agencies don't have the resources available. SB 1 is the gas tax bill that passed. Not only did it raise the gas tax, it also created registration opportunities for those who drive electric vehicles. So those who are using the roads are paying for it. So it does more than just raise the gas tax, but it is really critical. So I would encourage all of you to take note of SB 1 and what it funds. It funds Fix It First. It funds congested reduction programs. It funds trade corridor programs. This is the revenue that our local agencies need in order to pave their streets out in front of their residents' home. So that wasn't intended to be a commercial, but I would be remiss if I didn't point out that in order to accomplish some of the goals talked about here today for our future, we need to have the funding to do it, and SB 1 is a mechanism for that funding. And so I encourage you all to take note of SB 1 and what it does and what it doesn't do, and the consequences for the state if the funding is lost.
And Greg, if I could just, the gentleman's comments seem to encapsulate what I meant was that consumer concern about the quality of the transportation system. I mean, I think it's more than just a poor communication problem. I think there's a bona fide perception that things take too long, cost too much, and are ineffective. And some of that's fair, some of it's not, but I really think that a dialogue between those of us in the public sector, those of us in the public is, well, where do we go from here, and where might these revolutions change would be very healthy. There's too much of an us versus them, and we feel that you, the public, don't understand our challenges of resources and time and institutional constraints, but we also probably aren't listening carefully enough to your perceptions and concerns. So I'd hope to see that dialogue.
And as we wrap up, I want to give Austin one last comment, but I do want to say, in addition to public agencies and the public, I think we need to have more collaboration with the private sector as well. And just think about how does that fit into this, especially when you hear this word private-public partnership. But that's another, I think, conference that hopefully we can do in the future. But Austin, I kind of want to give you maybe some last words here. Knowing you've worked in the federal government and seen these large kind of spending issues, and now that you're back in California, what do you see the opportunities or the challenges around funding, or just how communities maybe can make more decisions for themselves when we do have this, I think, battle upon local control as well?
Yeah, I think these are all really good points, and just to remember where we are in this funding context. SB 1 is a huge step forward, but where we are right now, nationwide, about half of infrastructure, transportation infrastructure costs are paid for by what you might call a user fee, a gas tax mostly. So yeah, about half. That's down from essentially 100% when the interstate system was being built out. The rest is paid for from self-help and bond issues and other in general fund spending and other things that are not in this sort of user-pays mentality. So. And then when we talk about the future, we've got all these new issues coming in, right? The transit agencies are going to have trouble balancing their budgets for a lot of the reasons that came up today. We're going to have new services, new mobility services that aren't necessarily going to pay their way. So I think this kind of dialogue is really our best shot, and making sure that we are having those conversations between local governments, the planners, the public, the broader, the federal policy community that's trying to figure out how to make this all work together, and just the general principle of making sure these new technologies serve our goals rather than just happen, right? And starting from what do we insist they do for us, and how can we actually make that happen going forward, rather than just kind of letting it happen to us. I love that structure about, what can we do for technology? The technology is there for us. We built it. It is supposed to make our lives better and make every generation's life better than the last. And that, I think, is what we need to demand going forward.
Well, great. Well, now it's time for lunch, but before going to eat, I just want to join in a round of applause to welcome our panelists.